All right. Well, welcome back to another God Thoughts conversation. I am here with Zach, who is currently not even in town. Let's see, you're in Ashland, right?
Yep, down in Ashland. So.
Awesome, man. Well, why don't you just take a moment and sort of introduce yourself, who you are, your relationship to Fifth Avenue, because that's kind of who this video is for.
Yeah. So like Joel said, my name is Zach. Zach Schwarts, as you can see in the video. Um, and I'm a campus staff worker for Intervarsity Christian Fellowship, which is a college ministry. I work specifically at the University of Oregon, ministering to college students, leading them and asking questions about their faith and what does it mean to follow Jesus as a college student. So yeah, that's how I'm connected to Fifth Ave. Me and a bunch of students come to church there and join y'all on Sundays. You've seen InterVarsity students on the stage during worship, some preaching, and Brandy, who has preached from up front as well. She's was a former InterVarsity staff worker. So yeah, we've just kind of seen what Fifth Ave has done and matched what our values and beliefs were as a campus ministry. So we started coming by and yeah, just kind of joined communities pretty easily and well. And it's a good place for college students to experience what church and intergenerational church actually looks like besides just a group of college kids.
Yeah, I have so appreciated your attitude and Brandy's attitude, who was in your position before you, just of wanting to partner and be a part of a church community while also having your ministry. And I love seeing you guys on Sundays. It's so fun to get to know everybody. It's been a really huge blessing for us too.
Yeah, yeah, and it's fun just to have a place where we can recommend college students. Like, hey, like when you graduate, like there are communities of faith that are trustworthy and that you can show up to and
That's
continue.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, today let's start off just by talking about you're in ministry and you're at the college, so we know you spend a lot of time there. But right now, everything's kind of shut down, and you're not even in town. So, what has changed for you, kind of post pandemic world?
Yeah. So I mean, I think the biggest change is the amount of people that I see. I'm a very like this job is very people oriented. So typically week to week, my days center around meeting with students and discipleship meetings and pastorship meetings where I just check in with students. So, you know, 4 out of 5 days, I'm just posted up at a coffee shop on campus, and students are stopping by my table and checking in and going through things. And so, as well as leading Bible studies on campus, and we have a weekly large group gathering. It's like, 20 to 30 students a week. So now none of that's happening, right? Like campus is completely shut down, totally closed. Students, so many of our students aren't even back in Eugene. They left for spring break and are just staying home. And so that's why I actually decided, I was like, I live in a 1-bedroom apartment by myself, and was like, I don't need to be stuck here. So I actually came down to Ashland, which is where my girlfriend and her parents are currently quarantining. And then my sister actually lives down here. So I get to kind of be around some other people. But I think the biggest change is, I mean, like, I still am meeting with students, but it's all right. It's all via Zoom. So I just kind of am just getting into that structure of like regular weekly meetings with some students, and even recognizing my own capacity and saying like virtual meetings are exhausting and tiring. And so I've kind of focused in and said like, okay, what are the connections and the primary people that I can pour into in this time, and just been meeting with them.
Yeah.
And also, we switched to like virtual Bible studies, which is Zoom has a pretty good functionality for that. So what we do is we share a passage, and then everybody can mark the passage on an annotation when we share the screen, and say like, what does this mean? What does this mean? We've gotten into some good conversations that way. Yeah, and so then we have a virtual large group now, and we're trying to play games and have fun. And the biggest thing is feel like my ministry went from a primary goal of how do I develop students and um, teach them how to like be missional and like really care about justice and care about what's going on to the world, to how do I teach students how to maintain relationship and like have fun and grieve and be connected to themselves and to one another when that's really hard. Um, so it's kind of even a skill shift in what we're training students and teaching students to do.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. We had a great conversation last week. It was just fun to connect, and you shared a little bit about, you know, how you personally are being impacted and processing sort of
Mhm.
what this is meaning. And I really appreciated a lot of what you have to say, but and maybe that's changed now in the past week because I feel like every day is different. But how are you personally just kind of working through this? You know what? I know you know, a lot of people on the work level or for us in the ministry level, it's like we're kind of adapting and trying to figure out how to change. But there's just the whole personal inward process of, you know, how are we thinking about this and how are we kind of managing? Um, would you be up for kind of just sharing a little bit about what that's like for you right now?
Yeah, totally. Um, I mean, I think personally, I've been experiencing a lot of um, like grief, and I'm just identifying it as that now because I think before I was just like really tired, sleeping 9 to 10 hours a night, and not really sure why, but actually some person that I like follow was just talking about how like, oh, he's on Instagram and Twitter said like, I'm sleeping 8 to 9 to 10 hours a night because my body is working through emotions and things that my mind hasn't even got to yet. And I was like, that's what's happening for me. I think with a lot of the changes, like I love getting to talk to my students through Zoom, but like the thing that I just really enjoy is sitting at a coffee shop across from them, experiencing that like really personal connection, and that's just all been stripped away, and that sucks. And then like the joy of like being in person and playing games together and like going for walks together, like all of that's just kind of taken away. And so I've really been processing a lot of that grief. Um, and then just grieving for my students too, like seniors in college, they've been in school for, you know, what, 16 years now, and their commencement's been canceled at the U of O. Like that's a big deal, and it's really sad. And like there's just a lot of ways that the world has changed that for this, and necessarily, um, but it's just been like, oh, it's okay to pause and grieve and wait for what God is doing in this time. Um, I know I'm someone who has some like mental health stuff, and it's hard for me to just like move on really quick from things. And that's not true for everybody in my organization. And so there's been a lot of like, let's problem solve, let's do all this stuff. And I've had a hard time with that because I'm like, I need to sit and wait and grieve and see what God's up to instead of trying to solve this problem for God, and get through this thing. And like, maybe there's something for me to learn in this too. So it's been a pretty scatterbrained process, but I'm just trying to take it really slow, and continue to meet and make connections and say, okay, what's happening and what can I do for you, my students, and my neighbor and the people around me, and what is God up to in this time? Because I don't know yet.
Yeah. Yeah. You brought up so many things there. My last conversation that I recorded was we got into a conversation about lament, and it was really good, just to spend a little bit of time talking about how how we can give ourselves time to really work through and figure out what are those things that we're feeling. Exhaustion, that's something that I have felt a lot as well. Just like, man, I'm tired and I can't even put my finger on why. There's just like sort of this constant, thing in the background that is like sapping that energy or whatever. Um, do you have you discovered some ways, and please, like, they don't have to sound spiritual at all.
Yeah.
But have you discovered some ways that have been helpful for you to kind of just to discover those things, or ways of spending time with God during this season that have seemed to be really helpful?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think something that has always been helpful for me in my spiritual life is spiritual rhythms. Right. I have OCD, so like things that I can like put into a schedule. If I'm very, I wake up in the morning, I make my coffee, and if I don't make my coffee, my whole day is like kind of thrown. Right. Like rhythms are super important, and one of my favorite rhythms that I used to do is like every night before bed, um, before consciousness death. Um, but before bed, I would do the daily examine, right? And so just a couple of questions, checking in, reviewing days, being like, what am I thankful for this day? Where did I not show up today?
Mm.
How can I show up tomorrow? And so I used to do that every single night, and I went through a period where I didn't. And actually, during this time of quarantine, I picked it up again, and it's been really helpful. Because I think in the first week, specifically, I was like by myself in my apartment. And I was just alone, and so like the days just kind of merged into a big glump of things. And I was like, I don't remember what I did yesterday, and I know for sure I didn't do anything productive. And I don't think productivity is the goal during this season for me either, but just being aware of what I'm actually putting in front of me and what's going on. The examine's been a way that I just get to check in with God and myself and say, like, what's happening? What did I experience today? And it, like, honestly, it just like separates the days enough. So that's been really nice. And then, yeah, highly recommend that too. There's a couple of fun apps for anybody that wants to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just the whole thing about rhythms in general, even in some small ways, but for most of us in big ways, our rhythms have been totally upended.
Yeah.
And depending on your personality or how you're wired, that can be extremely disrupting and discomforting, and also just tiring. And finding those new rhythms, takes some time.
Mm-hmm.
And like, kind of like what you're saying, it's like, oh, you went back to this other thing that you have known as a way of kind of giving yourself a rhythm. I certainly would second that as finding little things that we can put into our day or put into our new rhythm that allow us to be really aware and allow us to tune in and check in with God and sort of be aware of where we're at are fantastic. I know Melissa, my wife, found a fantastic little uh, sort of a meditative process that she was able to go through, and we went through it together, and then we even took our kids through it. And I think that's just something I'm probably going to have to do like every week as sort of one of those, like a little bit larger rhythm, just to kind of keep tabs on where I'm doing, because I feel like it's changing so much.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, because I've talked to a couple of students, and right, that's kind of the thing that I've been asking them is like, what rhythms are you having to just be more aware of yourself in this time? And those like weekly check-ins, like I know I had one student, we like looked and found an app that's like just journal prompts, um, because she's like, I need to journal, but I hate just starting it. So I was like, well, here's, you know, a journal prompt every day to get you going, just to check in, and it's a rhythm. And, without rhythm, I feel personally, and I feel like it's true for most people, it can just get like, what did I do this past week? And like, I think in a time where like all of our natural rhythms are thrown off, that just, it can be really disorienting.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that makes me think too. What an interesting thing to be able to look back on when this season kind of takes an end. I mean, besides being a benefit now, to be able to go through and look in, as I'm sure many of us have done, is you look in your past and you can see sort of this ongoing conversation with God that you've been having, and how consistent that's been. That's a very encouraging thing, no matter what season of life you're in, to have, but certainly while you're in it. But I also think after the fact, it's wonderful to have those things to look back on as well. Or even, I mean, we're looking to the end of April, right? And kind of thinking that's our deadline for now. But if things extend, to be able to go back and say, what happened last week? What was I think? I had a great week 2 weeks ago. What was my conversation like at that point? To be able to go back and actually read through those things can be a fantastic encouragement.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it is. And like recording something seems super important. And I mean, one of my spiritual mentors talks to me about like vista points in our lives. And so it's like, yeah, we're like hiking in the clouds, and you can't really see what's going on around you. And then eventually you break through and you get a spot and you get to look at what has been happening on the trail behind you or what the view is. And I mean, right now, I don't think anybody's at a vista point right now. Like, you can't tell me. I mean, you can, and I believe you. But like, it feels really hard to identify like what's going on in my life. Where will I be when all this is over? And I feel really close to the disciples in this too, because I'm like, they had no idea when they were following Jesus what was going on in their life, and then it took till Acts 2, 3, 10, before they were like, oh, there's a vista point. I can see how my life has changed in this. And so I think we're all going to come out of this and be like, oh, I'm different in some way. And being able to look back at that feels important.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you be willing just to share a little bit of perspective for us on what some of maybe the themes that you're seeing or feeling from a lot of the conversation you're having with students? I was, coming into our conversation today, I was realizing the first three conversations I've had for these have all been with people who are kind of like post 40. They're all, married families. They're living with other people. It's easy to forget that this experience is very, very different for someone who is maybe away from home, for one, or also possibly just living alone and not having that built-in world kind of people around them. Like I have, my wife and two kids here, and that sort of becomes my world. But there are a lot of people, of course, who are on their own, and I imagine that you're just in touch with a lot of students who could probably be feeling or experiencing this in a very different way. So would you want to give us a little perspective for what that seems like?
Yeah. So I mean, it's definitely, there's like a couple of different spectrums and places where like college students are landing in that. Because there are some students that are back in like Eugene, living in their apartments or in their homes there, and they're by themselves completely. And so it's isolating, it's lonely, and they're trying to do school on top of all of that. So some professors have been really, like I've heard, have been pretty good to say like, hey, this term, like things are going to be different. I don't expect the same from you. But still, academic pressure is something that students struggle with all the time anyway, where it's like, if I don't get A's, like I'm a terrible person, my identity is forever gone. And so that pressure of academic success is still on students, on top of the isolation, the loneliness being kind of just increased in a crazy amount of ways. So I just see a lot of pressure on students. And then they're just trying to find a new rhythm, like all of us in that way, where it's like school doesn't stop for them. And I know some students that are at home are really thrown off because, when you go to college, part of the point of going to college is that you get this experience of becoming your own person and being autonomous. You get to explore things on your own, and you kind of step away from that nucleic family connection and say, who am I? Who am I without my family? Who am I without my home? And that changes culturally too, right? Like that's a pretty white cultural thing to step away and say, I'm my own person. But students are having a hard time being back in their houses because it's like, oh, we have Bible study at 7:30 on Tuesdays virtually. It's like, well, that's when my family's doing dinner. I got to go to dinner. Or, I know one of my students, their family, their parent and sibling aren't working right now, and so they're just around the house, doing chores and projects and hanging out, and they're in their room doing schoolwork, trying to focus. And I think for students, it just feels, for a lot of students that are home, it feels like a step back into high school, which is an interesting digression because it's not like a bad thing to be home with your parents, but in the development of who you are, it just feels different. I struggled in college to go home over Christmas break because I was like, oh, my parents don't treat me as who I am, they treat me as who I was. And that brings out the worst in me sometimes because I grew a lot in college. So
yeah.
So definitely, I mean, there's some hardship and just loneliness and isolation.
Yeah.
You know, we're in week 2 right now, and so it's like it's still just fresh and new to be in a new rhythm of school.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I had only thought about people who were alone. I hadn't thought about these students having to go back home and sort of navigate how to be a college student, but now at home when you've only been doing that away from home.
Yeah, yeah, and those, I mean, those are the two like schools that people are in. I'm totally alone and I'm struggling, um, or I'm at home and also struggling.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful to hear, and I imagine too we have people in our community at Fifth Avenue who have uh, students who are now home with them, parents who are home with them as well.
Yeah,
So probably good for all of us to hear and to think about.
yeah,
Makes me think too that when we all when we're able to come back together, it makes me wonder how much more we will value and take advantage of the opportunities we have to sort of to be together and to expand our worlds, rather than exist in our isolated states.
yeah, yeah. It's I always have laughed because I've always kind of made fun of there's like memes and internet jokes around about how like, oh, my friends canceled my plans, I'm so excited, and I always say no, you're not. Like you want to be with people. Like it's just kind of cool to say like, oh, I want to be home alone watching Netflix. And
Yeah.
now you're mandated to be home alone watching Netflix. It's not that much fun.
Yeah, nobody wants to do it when they're forced to, right? Well, man, I certainly, it's just fun to get to talk to you again and to hear how you're doing. And it's really encouraging to hear your process with God and how you're engaged in this. I know it really helps me to hear other people talk about how they're doing it because it's easy to feel like you're alone in your thoughts a lot of the time. So thank you for sharing with us. And also thanks for giving us perspective for sort of the younger crowd who is navigating this in their own way. And I'd encourage anybody who's listening, just if you're thinking about it, if you're touched or moved by hearing Zach talk about the students, for one, I think we can just be praying, right? I mean, praying for those family connection times, maybe for some really meaningful conversations or even healing of whatever needs to be healed in those family environments, because we all come out of families with with stuff, right? But also I hope that this encourages us as we go forward to find more creative ways to connect. Absolutely. And I'm sure I can imagine you guys getting back for your weekly meetings and kind of inviting students maybe that first time back, and how fun that's going to be to see everybody, and how weird too.
Yeah, yeah. It'll be weird to like hug someone again. Like I know Tim talked about that,
Yeah.
and I was just like, yeah, like I don't hug a lot of people, but I feel like I will.
Yeah, I think so. I think we'll just probably walk around touching each other and be like, hey, look at me. Anyway. All right, man. Well, I've taken up some of your time, and really appreciate you giving it to us, and look forward to seeing you when you're back in town. So thanks a lot for this conversation, Zach.
Yeah, of course. Glad to chat.
All right, we'll see you soon.